I meet a lot of interesting people on Karen's Quilt Circle. My next guest, Monica KLASING CHEN, is no exception. She was the viewer that recommended that I go to the Textile Research Institute in Leiden when I was in Holland last year. And after a couple of email conversations, I discovered that her next area of research is on mistakes. So I just had to have her on the show to talk about it. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here's my interview with Monica KLASING CHEN. Thank you, Monica, for being on the show today. Whereabouts in the world are you coming to us from?
I'm speaking from Heidelberg in Germany.
Are you originally from Heidelberg?
No, I'm originally from Brazil. My parents, one side comes from a German family, and my father was Chinese. Just happened to meet in Brazil.
What age did you move back to Germany?
Well, I just grew up in Brazil, so the entire family was there, and I did my BA studies there. And during the MA, then I decided to go abroad to study Chinese art history, which we don't have that program in Brazil. So that kind of brought me over to Germany.
When you're studying art history, is that part of the fine arts faculty or is that part of the history faculty?
We have a department that is specific for art history, at least here in Germany. That's usually how they divide it. So I guess a bigger institute for Chinese studies, Japanese studies, and then East Asian art history within that. And then they have a separate thing that is for European art history. So very specific.
So when did you come to quilting?
Yeah, so that's quite interesting. I started sewing very early with my grandma. I actually learned to sew on the treadle machine. I had never seen an electrical machine until I was like in my 20s. So it was just sewing with her garments, and she taught me how to like fit things, patterns to my size. I just went to her house twice a week to learn that, to paint as well with her. Quilting actually just started during the pandemic. So I was stuck at home not too long ago. I was, I guess, sewing masks for people and, whatever, sewing some blouses and shirts because I was kind of in a process of waiting for my dissertation to be evaluated. So I was anxious and bored at the same time, and I couldn't go out. So I just started, watching YouTube videos, looking, I don't even remember how to sew masks or, patterns. And then Donna Jordan pops up. So you know her from YouTube. She has lovely tutorials. She's super friendly in her videos. So took, I think, one of her free patterns and just went from there. And yeah, then I was infected with the quilting bug, I guess.
So do you piece the top and quilt the whole quilt yourself, or do you send it out to a long armor?
Yeah, that's another issue. There are not a lot of long armors in Germany. There's about 30. I think, in the entire country. So when I started quilting, I was living in the Netherlands because that's where I did my PhD. During the pandemic, I couldn't see anyone to talk about quilting. And I had never actually seen a quilt. So I just, was doing whatever. I didn't know. I mean, you get the measurements for the pattern size from the descriptions in the pattern, but I had no idea how dense the quilting motifs were. I didn't know how to, proceed with the thing itself of the quilting process, but I just, went for it. From the start, it was just myself in my living room, piecing and quilting and doing everything that involves it, learning how to bind without ever talking to anyone else about it. So it was a very strange process. I can show you maybe one of my first quilts that I also designed a pattern for. Do you want to see that?
Yes,
Please. Go get it. I started with like regular piecing and, cutting squares with the rotary cutter. And then I kind of discovered paper piecing. So this is my first pattern. So I made an armadillo. Oh, I guess this pangolin, right? It's a pangolin. Because of the pandemic, people were always kind of like, villainizing the animal. So I thought, no, it's a great animal. I'm going to quilt it. So this is totally paper pieced. And I think what was unusual, because I had no idea about, what other commercial patterns do, I included a curve, right? So that's a bit unusual for a paper piecing pattern. And this is the first one that I also quilted myself and did everything binding. It doesn't look too great, but for a first quilt, it's fine.
But you did the paper piece pattern for it?
Yeah, I just randomly drew out stuff and then I cut out the sections and started sewing. Yeah,
that's fabulous.
I'm kind of coming from painting. I've been painting for many, many years. So I have ideas about composition and color and stuff. I think it was like this geometric thing about quilting that really attracted me because it kind of reminded me of, Erich Kahle, the guy who painted the Very Hungry Caterpillar. It's like very bold colors and these really geometric shapes put together to form these weird animals and fruit. So yeah, I just went for it.
That's phenomenal work. Most beginners don't do their own paper piece patterns.
I think it's in part also because I just had no idea what was going on. So I just, let's try everything. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. I'll just move on to something else.
So in your studies, do you work with a lot of textiles?
I think this started kind of together with quilting that I became more interested in textiles. I now teach at Heidelberg University, and it's a lot of basic courses for undergrads. We also have like these modules on textiles. And next term, I'm going to teach one entire course that is based on, textile production in China, silkworm rearing, how do people apply embroidery patterns onto their garments, how do they sew their own shoes, because that was something people just did at home. And, the entire process up to the industrialization and when people start using sewing machines in China, how that changes when they start producing cotton and weaving, cheaper fabrics for commoners, that kind of thing. So it's going to be an overview. My personal interest, what I also want to work on in my own research, the broader idea behind it is to discuss what errors mean. So within crafts and arts as well. So what does it mean to talk when you do something wrong? How is it used as a didactic tool? So I look at many manuals for painting as well. So when a master says, or the author writes, you cannot cross the branches of a tree or the leaves of a bamboo in like an X shape. So you get a little graph in your book and it says, do not do, or maybe a hand bamboo leaf. You can't compose your leaf like that. That is wrong. And so this kind of comes up as a didactic feature in these manuals during the Ming Dynasty. So let's say roughly the 16th century. And then that's one area, but the sewing part, which is kind of introduced from Europe, right? So Chinese people tended to use very simple patterns. Things were quite, boxy when creating garments. And they usually use the entire width of a piece of cloth to kind of put that together into these boxy, overcoats and robes, etc. With time, when they got more in touch with Western standards, they started actually using patterns that, would fit the body snugly. So that was something new. What they just had was like clasps and you have belts and closures, but not the cut of the garment itself. So that was introduced later. And my interest then is to see which kind of didactic measures are these new sewing books introducing. And also when people have to deal with their sewing machines, we know the dreaded manual. How do they tell you, do not do that? Or what are the mistakes that you can make when you're sewing or working with a new machine in your home? So yes, very broad, I guess, project, but, sewing and crafts that people do by themselves at home as well, those are part of the project.
So the concept of mistakes is quite interesting because I know in quilting, there's a lot of people who are afraid to start because they're afraid of making a mistake. And then there's the mistakes that you make just being, I wouldn't say sloppy, but you're just not paying attention to what it was supposed to be. But some people can take advantage of those things and jump off from that. Are you finding that it's different in the past than it is now or similar?
That's the thing. I think when you have the elite talking about mistakes, they also talk about bad habits and stuff, how to get rid of bad habits. So it's very normative. And usually they want you to copy the masters, right? So I'm talking about painting here. So you're going to get whatever, a painting by a famous Song Dynasty master, and you're going to put your student down to copy it to the T, right? So every single detail you have to kind of appropriate and make it something that you are able to copy and, use in another painting. So then mistakes are more of a, didactic tool. The master tells you, looking at other paintings by other, maybe contemporary painters, this is a mistake. You cannot paint the wall like this. It looks like the stones are falling out, or, something like that. But when it comes to the actual practitioners, and then we can kind of have, ephemera. So you get drafts and sketches that you can use for research, but also the paintings themselves. Sometimes you have a painting where you have like a flower arrangement and some bugs flying around it. And people just draw, a bee on top of obviously something that was like a stain, or something that they kind of, maybe the brush touched the paper where it wasn't supposed to. And so they just added a bug, make it part of the painting. So it really depends. I think for books and manuals, it's intended as instructional. So it's not about usually finger pointing or you did it wrong, that it's bad. It's just, avoid this because this isn't going to look good. And on the practice side, obviously people make mistakes, but usually they tend to incorporate it somehow or make changes to fit it. Two tendencies.
Did you see a change in the way that they use color over different dynasties?
Well, the thing is, in China, a lot of the garments and the colors including were regulated. So it depends on the dynasty, but the more information we have is from like recent ones, the Ming and the Qing, and there they had like really specific regulations for who can wear. So fading is another issue. I mean, if you kind of pry open a seam and you can see that the color of a fabric is totally different. They also like really bright colors, especially for, imperial family and the elite. But commoners, usually they would wear, paler things. I think it's in part because the dyeing process is maybe costly or difficult. So to get vibrant colors. So that was, I guess, different standards for the classes.
So what was your dissertation?
Yeah, my dissertation was on mnemonics. So it's about trying to kind of compress or codify knowledge and practices into rhymes and kind of aids to help a student or a craftsman to remember steps of a process. The focus was on painting and calligraphy. And I mean, I can give you an example for painting a portrait. For they would just say, you divide the horizontally into 5 eyes. So that's if you have like a frontal portrait, which was the usual format for ancestral portraiture, you get 5 eyes across the face. So that's the width. And lengthwise, you divide into 3 parts, which is, up to the nose bit, and then the forehead. So, and that they would give you in a rhyme. And it should allow someone to kind of quickly draft out the shape and format of a face. So that was for painting. For calligraphy, there were all kinds of other techniques, also including graphs, how to, separate and divide things so they look harmonious, and that kind of, I guess, aid in these manuals. But the major thing, I think, is the introduction of these rhymes. So kind of ditties or, just formulas to get students to work. So I think it's similar when people are learning to long arm. And you have like, loop goes up, loop goes down. So you got this song in your head or, depending on your pattern, and you just repeat it over and over. And at some point it becomes part of your nature. You just, embody the thing. And I think that was kind of the process that Chinese people were exploring during the Ming Dynasty, especially. So you just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until eventually together, when you're doing it, while you're practicing it, you'll just get it. So first, you kind of put it in your head, and then, with time, you'll get used to incorporating that in your practice.
So have you developed any for quilting?
I guess similar things for long arming. So sometimes I do that, but nothing in a rhymed format yet. But it would be interesting. I've thought about it. So maybe in the future.
I actually use one every morning when I'm getting ready. It's Marvel. So I have moisturizer, antiperspirant, vitamins, earrings, and lipstick. Those are my 5 things that I've got to do every morning.
They would separate things into steps. So it was really supposed to, guide you through a process while for, something practical. I don't know. I mean, in the West, we also have like, if you're memorizing the periodic chart, I think in English, you probably have a song too. Yeah. In German, you have like songs about the months that you teach children, so they get the right order for the months of the year. And it's kind of ubiquitous. It's everywhere. But people in China during the 16th century really started to explore it as a teaching aid. So that was the main topic of the dissertation.
So just going back to mistakes, you talked about somebody taking a splotch and turning it into a bee. What other creative ways have you seen mistakes handled?
Well, I work mostly with manuals. So it's usually more on the normative side, but I don't know. Maybe we'll see. The ephemera part is a little difficult. A lot has been lost. Sometimes things are hidden so well that you can't tell that they're mistakes. So if you're looking at actual works, we'll see. I still have to continue working on the project. But the focus is mostly on manuals.
Another person on Karen's Quilt Circle last year. Her name was Diane Fox-Revitt. And she is a person who her motto is, it started with an oops. Her project starts with a mistake. And she just kind of uses that as a jumping board. It makes incredibly creative, beautiful improv projects. Is improvisation something you think that was encouraged, or people were really asked to follow the straight and narrow?
I think when you're training, you're supposed to, copy it exactly as you see it, to kind of appropriate the techniques. The more, painters who were already established, they could sometimes just randomly do things. And there was this trope that the famous painters are drunk and they kind of, get inebriated. So they have like a more free expression. So that was one thing. And spontaneity was also encouraged. But all of that was kind of based on this hard training that you did as, a student. So you already had all the techniques. So once you have that, you can be spontaneous. You can just let go of, and improvise because you already know the basics. So.
Is the style of instruction in the periods that you're looking at, is that very much like a teacher or a master with apprentices underneath that person, or would it be more of a classroom situation?
Painting, and I think most crafts was usually like a master-student relationship. So very intimate. Students would often go and live with masters to learn not only the craft, but, everything around it, and basically like a full education, you could say. But with time, this slowly changes. So when I look at the manuals, my impression is that, when they talk about the mistakes as well, so you don't have to do that in the manual. We don't have like quilting patterns that tell you not to do something, but this is kind of a process of kind of distancing the master and student relationship. So someone just wants to publish a book so people can kind of become autodidacts and learn things, from paper and just the resources that they have. So not everyone had access to a master, not everyone had access to famous paintings that were supposed to copy. So you kind of have a cheaper replacement for that by introducing these handbooks. They had other strategies too. It wasn't only the mistakes. I think one thing that interests me as well is that something I also looked at in my dissertation was the creation of typologies. For portraiture painting, for example, you would just give, I guess masters would have shown that to their students before, but once you have the manual, you can just leave through types of noses, for example, and then you construct the sitter's face based on those, standard noses that you've memorized. So you would give them catchy names like eagle eyes or, smiley eyes, things that a student can remember and just, relate directly to the shape of what he's painting. And that would just be translated into the manuals in a graphic format. I kind of took part of that strategy in my quilting practice. You have like only a few set of paths because you have to keep like a one thread path, right, in mind. That's the goal of long arming. So one thing is like a loop. So one thing would be, you come in from the side and you loop whatever shape this is like a silhouette or something. And then you continue outwards. Then you can get more complex shapes if you do like an H or an infinite sign. Then you can, construct something here. I don't know, a bumblebee that has intersections, or some kind of flower that, spreads out below, and then you move on. And another one that I found is quite useful is the yin and yang symbol. You basically go around and then out the other side. So that would be like this. So, and this one allows you to create a lot of very complex things. So one pattern that I kind of designed based on that was like penguins holding hands. I mean, they don't have hands, but holding flippers. It will be something like this. This doesn't look too great, but it's the same path. So you come in, you go around, you go back through the middle, and then you go back through the top. So it's basically the yin and yang construction, but you have like a complex penguin shape to do that. So yeah, that's kind of things that when you look at these handbooks, the way they abstract information and they communicate it, it just simply makes sense. And it's totally feasible to kind of, bring that over to quilting and other crafts that you're interested in and make these typologies for yourself. So
excellent.
That influenced me. Yeah.
How long have you had your long arm?
About a year, a little less than a year. Yeah.
So you jumped on the long arm boat pretty quickly.
Yeah, I did. I mean, because I think I came from painting, and it's you have to move your arm and your body to do that, and not wrangle something around below your machine. So I thought that would be more suitable for my skill set.
So are you a free motion quilter, or do you like to use rulers?
Both. I do a lot of like naturalistic, I guess you would call it pictorial stuff. So I did one quilt over long. It's a whole cloth, and I got this flower vase pattern in the center.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So, and it's basically using the same principles I just explained. So, it's not really a big. Skip from it. You just incorporate it into more complex shapes, right? So maybe if you're doing a loop design, while you're at it, you branch out and do an infinite or an 8. And while you're at it, you just branch out and do a yin-yang thing. And then you just go back and you continue the path that you had before. So yeah, I guess that's...
Well, first of all, that's amazing work. Absolutely amazing work. I hope you enter a quilt show soon, because that's above beginner. Definitely. But that's interesting that you say that it's a yin yang thing, because I've never even thought of that angle before. So is that just something that you have taken a look at and have brought to the table, or is that an actual skill that was taught to you?
I just came up with that. I don't know. So,
amazing.
Yeah. I mean, the basics you get, right? So the loop thing is something also, if you look at pantographs, you can use them as inspiration for a pattern you're working on. Then you just see that, things continue along this, usually the loops. So, or, complex shapes, if you have like hearts or whatever, and you just continue them like this, right? So you go in, right. You do your shape, or a cat, it can be very complex, whatever silhouette you want to include, and then you just continue out. Yeah, and I just kind of abstracted like the people in my manuals do. How do I get to the very basic of a design? And those three, as far, as I've looked at things, are kind of the main ones that I've identified.
So talking about Chinese art, have you tried to quilt with silk?
I have one project in mind. I already bought silk for it. And it's like it's a tabby weave, so like simple grid weave, basically like what you would use for painting. And it's very thin and transparent. So I want to use different wool dyed in different colors and kind of stuff it underneath this transparent fabric and then long arm it as a whole cloth. So I'm going to create the color distinctions just by stuffing kind of like a fake trapunto with different color shades of wool. So we'll see how that goes.
So how are you? So you've just started quilting a number of years ago, and you mentioned that you've done it in isolation. How have you dealt with mistakes in your quilting?
Usually I just rip them, right? You can always rip. So I don't think it's that bad in quilting. You can always find a solution, replace a fabric or, rip something out. I don't think I've ever had something where I said, this is total crap, I'm going to trash it. So there's always some kind of reuse of things.
Are you using new fabrics or are you using recycled fabrics?
Whenever I have a pair of jeans that doesn't work anymore for me, then I just kind of make it into a bag or something with applique, just reuse it, but I also get American fabrics and local fabrics. Maybe, I guess your viewers don't know, but the things that are important from the US, they're like extremely expensive here. So maybe if you're paying like $10 for a yard, we're paying like 22 for a meter. So you get like $20 for a yard approximately. So that's how things are at the moment here. And we have some local fabric companies that usually make fabrics for garments, also for like children. They're also like cotton, same weight. So they could just call it poplin instead of quilting cotton. But the weight is the same. So if you look at the grammature, it's about maybe 130, 140 grams. And those are wider because they're made for garments. The quality is similar. So you can just use that. And they then here also cost $10 instead of 20. So I think, yes, I should start sourcing more local fabrics instead of the American ones. Yeah.
So do you belong to a guild?
Oh, yes, many guilds, actually. So when I started quilting by myself in the Netherlands, I joined the guild, and I was kind of hoping that at some point I would meet someone from the guild. That never happened because I also moved to Germany during the pandemic, so I never got a chance to go to any meeting or meet anyone else, or even go to an exhibit of their quilts. But when I came to Heidelberg, I joined the local guild and also the German National Guild. I think it's just absolutely wonderful. The history also of the Heidelberg Guild. So it was basically founded by Americans who were here at the American bases, right? Since the Second World War, they've installed several bases in Germany. The American women started starting these guild initiatives. And the guild I'm in now here locally is one that kind of went through this process. So first, we had American women who kind of took the initiative to contact local women. So it was also something to build community, which I guess for quilting always is. So you want to get involved with the locals and, exchange knowledge and talk. And that was the same in that case. And I think in 2013, they shut down the American base. And from then on, it was only German members. So the language kind of also shifted. Now we only speak German in our quilt meetings. But the spirit is still there. So we have several initiatives like donating quilts to children, hospice, also sewing like little heart-shaped pillows that are for people with breast cancer. I think it was a doctor who developed that pattern, and that has been kind of disseminated, and it's now used kind of to relieve the pressure when you're in chemo or something like that. So we sew those pillows once a month. We meet to do that. And yeah, in the past, they also had other initiatives. So those are the main two ones we have at the moment. One of the issues, though, is the aging problem, you could say. I think the average age is about 60, 65, the members. So I'm the youngest one. I'm in my 30s. And yeah, I think we kind of need more people to join to, keep the thing going. Yeah.
I think that's a problem with all guilds, that they just need to figure out how to bring in those new people. The more publicity your guild gets, I think the more people will come to it. Does your guild do a quilt show?
Yeah, I mean, last year, we had a big one. And next year we have the 35th anniversary of our guild. So we're going to have another large one. So, I mean, it's not something regular, but we usually have shows of some kind.
Do you put a label on your quilt?
Yes, I try when I can, but not all of them have one. No, I don't know.
How many languages do you speak?
I guess, well, I speak Chinese, Portuguese, German, and English. And then some others that I kind of picked along the way, but they're kind of, basic level, Japanese or, yeah.
When you were growing up, Portuguese, I guess, was the local language. And then did your parents speak to you both in their native tongues, or did they send you off to school to learn those?
Yeah, my mom always spoke German with us. So I have two sisters and we all spoke German at home. And my dad, when we were very little, he used to speak Chinese. But at some point he gave up. I think it might have been because he migrated to Brazil also when he was like 9, 10-ish. So maybe, yeah, he just thought that, if you want to discuss like real and important things, it's easier to do it in Portuguese. They all spoke Portuguese fluently. So there was never that language barrier for them.
Did you do much traveling in China?
Yes. I spent half a year there also for study and went there a couple of times, also Taiwan, and yeah, traveled around a lot. So
you must have had to learn not only how to speak it and hear it, you would have to learn what the characters look like if you're studying the manuals.
Yeah. I mean, the manuals are all in classical Chinese, so that's like a whole different language. Basically, you have the same characters. I guess now in mainland China they use simplified characters, but they're still really closely connected to the traditional writing system. But the way that the characters are used is very different. So depending on the sentences, you could have words that are either verbs or nouns. So you would have to interpret from the way that the things are structured, which interpretation am I going to pick? And characters could also have different meanings. So depending on what they're paired with, or even by themselves, you just have to deduce from context, which meaning are you going to pick to interpret in this situation. But I mean, I started having Chinese lessons early. My dad was quite adamant that we should all learn Chinese, also writing. So we started when we were very little going to like Chinese, singing lessons. It was also at a Chinese Catholic church in Brazil. After that, we just went on with like Sunday school for Chinese at the church. And I did not like it at the time. I really disliked going to, school every Sunday for obvious reasons. But at some point then I started painting, taking the painting lessons with the Chinese painting master, you could call him. And suddenly I was like, okay, wait a second, maybe it is interesting to learn this language. So I think that's when I actually, started taking it seriously and learn it properly. But I think in quilting, there's the same thing, right? So you always have these language barriers. For German people, I often get comments like, I don't speak English that well, so I don't know they don't really get to know what happens in other quilting communities. And another issue is obviously the measurements. They don't want to do things in inch. They want to use centimeters. I think it's quite interesting the different traditions, you could say, that develop. So if you look at Japanese quilting communities, you're going to have very different quilts and designs there that you're not going to find in the US or in Germany. And I kind of think that it's partly because of the language barrier, that you're just communicating and exchanging their, ideals about quilting.
It's also about learning styles. Like North America really doesn't have that mentor-student relationship in very many things. It's almost always classroom or teach yourself, where I was talking with a Japanese quilter probably about 5 years ago at Houston, and she clearly had a mentor that she was following. And it was a very good thing, very exciting and unique thing when a quilter took you on as a student. There seemed to be few masters that were willing to do that, but it's also that relationship of you have to follow exactly what the master says. And I think that kind of goes against North American thought.
You want to be creative and individual.
I have a degree in martial arts, and I remember that was a hard thing for me to learn. You know, when you go into a class, nobody's interested in your opinion or whether you think this is good or bad. You just follow the rules.
Yeah, in Germany, I think it's more like the American model because it was brought by Americans. We have classes, and I mean, also in our guild, it's more about, you know, people share and ask for opinions. And yeah, I mean, the ladies in my guild, they have very unique ideas as well. So they're maybe, you know, sometimes funny and unusual things that they want to do. I had this one, there was this one woman who one day said, "I hate Sunbonnet Sue." And then one day I made a Sunbonnet Sue block with a knife in her back. And then she sent me a picture of it. And I was like, yes, this is hilarious. I mean, and they're just like, yeah.
I love German quilters. I see their pictures go through my Instagram page, and they're very creative, but it may come back to what you were saying with yourself, like because there's not a big quilting infrastructure in Germany, people are making it up as they go along. And maybe they don't feel the same need to follow the rules that we do.
Yeah, I mean, there was no tradition here before Americans came, I guess, because we don't use quilted, you know, things on our beds. We don't have blankets that way. People use the duvets with covers, right? So that was never a thing. And I think also in terms of, you know, doing patchwork, yes, like, you know, maybe an accessory, a pocket or something used to be done in patchwork, or quilted garments, you would have that, but not so much a tradition of making something, you know, for daily use in that, like quilted blankets. So I think that was something pretty new, and maybe that's why it's also mostly seen as a hobby and not so as something that creates a utilitarian item. So you're freer because you know, it's something you're picking up voluntarily and you just do as in your free time. Yeah.
With your long arm, are you now quilting for other people?
Yes. So I started that recently, and I take, I guess, orders as well. And people can contact me at SteppbySteppquilting@gmail.com. So that's a pun, obviously, in German. Everything in the quilting world has to be a pun. So steppen in German is to quilt, so top stitching. So step by step is always step with two P's, because steppen is quilting. So that's where it comes from.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for being on the show, Monica. It's been fascinating learning more about what you've studied.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you, Karen.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Monica KLASING CHEN. I loved how she brought her expertise in other disciplines to quilting. And I'm definitely trying out her yin-yang technique in my next long arming session. If you would like to contact Monica, I'll have her contact information in the notes below. I have made plenty of mistakes myself, and I have made a number of videos about them. So I'll also leave a link to that playlist as well. Next time you're in your sewing room, be sure to have Karen's Quilt Circle playing on in the background. I have interviewed so many amazing people on this show. Let one inspire you. And now you can take Karen's Quilt Circle on the road because it's available on YouTube Music. And check out last week's video on Quilt As You Go. Take care, and I'll see you next time.